Let me quickly review your quiz from last time. And I have them up here. Please make sure you see them before you leave. Don't take them. These are group quizzes. I want to make sure everyone in the group gets to see them. Your score is out of 10. Make sure you can read my handwriting. And make sure the grade that I posted online matches what I've written on your quiz itself. So get a look at that before you go. Meredith Michaels, in her thought experiment, just a quick review here, is going the opposite direction that Leibniz gives us in his thought experiment. Remember last week or last class, we looked at the thought experiment that Leibniz offers, pushing a psychological continuity view. That it is our mental states, it's our memories, or as John Locke puts it, it's our consciousness, and the extent to which consciousness extends backward in time, that constitutes our sense of self, that is our identity through time. And Leibniz's thought experiment was having us imagine that we would be granted any wish that we'd want. Right? We'd be king or queen of China or something like that. At the time, that was the presumption was you would have anything that you would want, but on the condition that your memories would be erased. Now, the intuition there is you wouldn't take on that whatever it is. You wouldn't agree to those conditions because it would be the same thing as saying, "We'll give you everything you want, bless you, except that we're going to give it to someone else." Because it's not going to be you on the psychological continuity view, because we've erased all of your memories. And so who's going to say, yeah, I'll take that deal? Because it's not you, according to the intuition here, it isn't actually you that's getting the deal. It's something else, right? Because the memories are all gone. You are gone on the psychological continuity view. Meredith Michaels goes the opposite direction. And I think there's a subtle point that was missed here. And it was fundamental in the thought experiment. Not the Schwanda and the Wanda thought experiment, where Wanda gets run over by a steamroller, and that freaks you out. You die from a stroke watching it. That's interesting. That's a lead up to the Dr. Nefarious thought experiment, which was what the quiz was about. What was the Dr. Nefarious going to do? Do you remember? Dr. Evil, that's what Nefarious means.
Torture.
Torture your body. Do all these horrible things to your body at 5 o'clock tomorrow. You hear that, put yourself into that position. You're going to be afraid. Does your fear go away in that moment? Like, it's right now I'm telling you this. And tomorrow at 5, your body's going to be tortured. You're going to be afraid right now. Do I alleviate your fears by telling you, oh, don't worry though, I'm going to brainwash you right before?
No.
Yeah, that was immediate, right? Your intuitions, as Daniel Dennett, philosopher of mind, puts it, this thought experiment is an intuition pump. It's supposed to get us to think, to conceptually analyze something from a unique or clarified position. And immediately you say, no, I'm still going to be afraid, even though you erased even though you're telling me now my memories are going to be erased, my mental states are going to be changed to Ronald Reagan's or Nixon's or whatever. You're still afraid. This is the point of the thought experiment. You're still afraid now, anticipating the torture that's going to happen to you. You might say, well, it's going to happen to my body. But notice, if you still have that fear, the intuition's supposed to be, at the very least, this shows that the psychological continuity view leaves out too much. It ignores too much if you leave out the body. The body is actually more important to us than the psychological continuity theorist, or the soul theory, for example, or the illusion theory, for that matter, will allow for. That's what she's trying to show. And Caroline, I guess your response is, yeah, that works. I'm convinced by that thought experiment. Was anyone else not convinced? Did anyone else say, you know what, you tell me my memories are going to be erased? Just as the Leibniz thought experiment, where I wouldn't take on that challenge of getting anything I want, on the condition of my memory being lost, this isn't going to be anxiety-inducing, because it's not going to be me that gets tortured. Does anyone think that? Or do you still feel it's frightening to you?
It logically alleviates it, but not instinctively. You can't really fight your instincts. So. Therefore.
That's interesting. So logically, intellectually, I understand it's not going to be me that's tortured. But there's something intuitively that says, or emotionally.
Because we have an emotional connection to our bodies. Like if we, since we're used to caring for them, basically.
So your body is a thing. It's a property. It's your property. You have a connection to your property in a way that you're connected emotionally, even though intellectually you realize it isn't you. Is that what you mean?
Well, you could, intellectually the mind racing does make you realize that your personal mind won't experience that pain.
And yet
But
your
since
emotions...
our brain is actually connected to the... and
Right.
So like chemically
Okay.
you understand, logically, intellectually that won't be you.
Okay.
But that emotional connection doesn't go away because it's more of an instinct than an intellectual curiosity.
And so you're saying the thought experiment somewhat fails because on intellectual grounds it's not convincing. It's only convincing on an
Purely
emotional...
intellectual grounds, it's not
Okay.
convincing, but that's not how humans work. We're not purely intellectual.
Oh. Then you're saying you do agree.
Yeah, I did.
Okay, I was confused there. I don't know who was next. I'm sorry. I'll point that way. You
I
decide.
was going to say I would disagree on that one, saying that it would scare me worse knowing that my mind's going to be erased, because then I know whether it's actually the me at the current moment, it will still be me at a later time with memory erase, or some other entity being tortured, and then they're going to be tortured on top of not knowing why they're being tortured, where they are, who they are.
Yeah.
Maybe
Well, they'll be Ronald Reagan.
Yeah.
It'll be Ronald Reagan.
Exactly.
Why am I being tortured? That was Ronald Reagan, and that was exactly Ronald Reagan, by the way. None of you may know who Ronald Reagan is. I nailed it just then. I'm not going to do it. I'm not going to do it again. I'm not going to embarrass myself. But that was it. Next time you go look up Ronald Reagan. I was just it. So,
I think it's even worse having to deal with it at that point.
okay. But why would it be worse though if you take the psychological continuity view? It would be like saying, "Hey, imagine this. I'm gonna torture your body tomorrow at 5 p.m. But it's really going to be Ronald Reagan's consciousness." Wouldn't that be the same as saying, if we accept the psychological continuity view, wouldn't that be the same as saying, "Hey, tomorrow at 5 p.m., Ronald Reagan's going to get tortured"? It's like, okay.
Well,
I mean, that's unfortunate, but it's not bothering me. Well, what was it?
I know personally I wouldn't want someone else being tortured either.
Right,
It's a moral.
but there's a difference, though. She's only focusing on, wouldn't you be afraid? I'm not going to be afraid. I might feel for Ronald Reagan, but I'm not going to, it's going to be a different kind of fear. That's her point. Yeah.
Well, I'm kind of thinking the same thing as him. Like, if your memory gets erased, like you're still you just don't have your memory. You're still gonna feel the torture. So doesn't this make the thought experiment like not really work in a way? Because like earlier you said.
But what about the replacement of Ronald Reagan's consciousness? Go back to Locke's cobbler.
Replace it with someone else's.
She does that after you erase him, right?
You'd still have to have some kind of connection to the body at that point. You would just have Ronald Reagan's consciousness. It's still
Yeah,
going to be
it's still-
some entity that you at that moment are thinking is you getting tortured.
So yeah, wouldn't you just be out of the equation? Because you're gone.
How do we hear toilet flushing here? That's her point. If I'm a psychological continuity theorist, then I shouldn't have any fears because it's someone else, because identity goes with consciousness and mental states. It's namely Ronald Reagan in this case. So if I'm a psychological continuity theorist, I shouldn't have any fears. But the intuitions are, at some level, I still do. Even though I know it's not me consciously, it's still me, it's my body. And I can't separate that. Her point is, the psychological continuity view by itself is insufficient. It has limitations to it.
Could you kind of like reverse the roles, like say, oh, I'm going to torture this person, and I'm going to put your consciousness in them?
You know, I don't think she does that in the selections she has here, but we can tweak the thought experiment. This often happens.
Would that make you scared then?
So, did you everyone hear what she said? What he said? I'm going to torture that body over there. And you know what? Right before I torture it, I'm going to take your consciousness and put it into that body. That's I mean, this is awful. Doesn't that seem frightening? Well, if we already intuitively accept the Freaky Friday scenario, which you all do, because you all watched that movie and went along with it and said, yeah, I see what's happening. The consciousness of the daughter is now in the body of the mother. I follow that, and I don't resist imagining that possibility. I can suspend my disbelief and follow that thought experiment. If so, we should do the same thing. That body over there is going to be tortured tomorrow. Oh, that's unfortunate. Yeah, and we're putting your consciousness in it. your mental states that you have now, we're going to transfer them into that body. That should scare you if you're a psychological continuity theorist. That's an interesting, that makes it more complex, really. That's a really good thought. Yeah. Oh, actually, sorry, you were next. I haven't heard from you yet. So 1, 2, and then another hand I saw?
Yeah.
Go ahead.
I was gonna say, is it not, like, say, like, you have, like, your childhood house that you've grown up in, and someone says, alright, we've sold your house, and you have another house, but this one's about to get destroyed. Like, you're still gonna be, like, afraid that, like, you're like, oh my god, my house is gonna get destroyed, but it's not yours anymore.
Is it a fear, or is it a sadness that a possession of yours has been damaged, is going to get destroyed?
If we're going off of, like, you think of your body as, like, possession, you've had to care for it your whole life, so would it be, like, fair to say that you need a body? Because, I mean, humans adapt, like, your brain adapts to the physical things that you learn, so if you were in another body, another house, you would not be comfortable in it, but you would eventually take on that part of it, and you'd still be worried, but, like, you would know, like, logically that, okay, it's okay, but still, like, emotionally, like, having that attachment, it still affects you, but logically, you know it's okay.
That goes to what Kelly was talking about earlier, and when we look at artificial intelligence next week, we'll see one of the limitations of AI is to assume that we can just feed logically data, material, information into machines, and then they will become intelligent, and not have to worry about, the mushy emotional stuff of humans. Well, guess what? You lack intellectual capacities if you lack emotional connection. So, as you were saying, there's more to us than just our intellect. And it's not clear that the psychological continuity view, for example, ignores that. Part of the psychological continuity view is consciousness, mental states, which could include emotions. I think we could expand that to include emotions. But what is an emotion if not an embodied state? So you see, as you're all pointing out this, and I think this is not inconsistent with Meredith Michael's argument, that both body and mind seem to be essential to identity. And that if we dismiss animalism too quickly, we fail to recognize the extent to which we don't just have our bodies as property. Now, she doesn't want to say that, I don't think, but that we identify with our bodies, which is a little bit different. Go ahead, and then last hand, and we'll go on.
I think I had a similar thought to what somebody was saying in the back, but it would be curious to put it in the form of a question, the same the Freaky Friday scenario. So for example, it's you, and you switch minds with somebody else, or bodies, it doesn't really matter. So one person ends up with your quote-unquote mind, and one person ends up with your quote-unquote body. And then you're posed a question of who would you rather be tortured? The person with their mind or the body? And obviously, I think 99% of people would choose the person with the body that looks like you, so because you wouldn't feel the
Very
pain.
good, interesting. This is a sort of metaphysical Sophie's Choice. You remember that? You know that film, Sophie's Choice? Book, Sophie's Choice, where she has to choose, in the Nazi Germany, she has to choose which child she has. I'm sorry, this class is, and it's going to get worse, by the way. There's all sorts of horrible thought experiments. As most thought experiments are, as Dr. Nefarious, that means evil, going back to Descartes with an evil genius. But Sophie's Choice was, pick a child. You can only save one of them. Are you kidding me? That's the worst possible scenario. I don't know what the hell I would do. She chose one, by the way. She apparently had a favorite. It's just awful. But it's more complex than that. Your thought experiment, the tweaking of this thought experiment is a very good one. Now that seems to imply, again, a psychological continuity view. The way you phrased it, it pumps our intuitions to say, if I had to make a choice, I would want that body with somebody else's, my body with somebody else's consciousness to get destroyed or tortured, than this new body I have been put into, but that has my consciousness. Because pain, as we're going to see, is a mental state.
Right.
Interesting. Is there one more question? You're thinking about it? Well, I'll only get the other hand first, and then you tell me.
I was going to say, just what they were saying, kind of emotional connection, even if you look at your body as a property.
Like I own this.
Like you own this body,
Yeah.
or you own this that water bottle. If you look at it like that, maybe to add on to that little bit of an experiment, what if you thought your mind was uploaded and had to watch it tortured?
Well, I didn't hear that. What was it?
Say you got uploaded into a computer and you're watching the body getting tortured. You still wouldn't like that very much, seeing yourself get tortured. You may not be physically feeling the pain, but I know in a lot of cases people wouldn't want to watch their body get tortured.
No, and in fact, there is
still
also
emotional connection to your property.
Yeah.
That's true. That's
Like a
true.
house thing.
Whether you're actually getting hurt or not, I would still be worried for my body watching it getting tortured, even if I'm completely disconnected from the body.
Right. And there's A Buddhist view on this would expand it even further and say, when you see other people suffer, there's something that empathic reaction. You literally feel. It's not just, oh, I can see that they're in pain. It's I feel it because we're interconnected. And I didn't get to talk about this last time. I forgot about it. There's something called mirror neurons that activate in our brains, in our motor cortex, when we see other people engage in goal-directed behavior. Also, when we see people suffering pain. So if I see somebody getting kicked or something like that, my neurons in my brain fire as if the pain is happening to me. And neuroscientists will talk about it in terms of the neurons in question can't tell the difference between that body that's being that's undergoing pain that we're perceiving, and this body that the neurons are part of. The neurons literally cannot tell the difference. And there's an interesting connection between neuroscience and Buddhism that shows we're all interdependent. You know this when you go to movies. A great example of this is where in the Jurassic Park, you know, the first one, there's a scene in which the T-Rex is coming. It's coming to bite the guy, obviously, because he can't get him with his arms. It's a useless creature with what. You know, this is stupid. How did that evolve? That's why they went extinct, because they had no arms. It's a dumb animal. Anyway, this short-armed, stupid animal is trying to bite this guy's legs. And you can see the guy's legs jutting out from underneath the Jeep. And as you're watching, people in the audience are watching. This is just one example. You think of any other films in which something like this happens. As the T-Rex comes to bite the legs of the guy, people in the theater instinctively draw their legs in. What the hell are you doing? Your brain does not know the difference in that moment between that body and yours. Granted, there's other parts in your brain that override the thought that you're in danger, right? You don't run out of the theater. Dinosaur! It's coming after me.
Well, it's just like when you watch on YouTube, someone get hit in the nuts by something. You have the instinctive, oh! It's like
right.
You see someone...
Yeah, and you cringe. It's like, what are you doing?
Yeah.
I don't know. That guy got hit in the nuts. So? Why are you cringing? Because I'm a feeling person. That's why. I have empathy. Yes. I think there's something interesting with respect to philosophy of mind and the mind-body question, and of course the identity question. Let me get your question now.
Well, I was thinking if you could connect or disconnect the mind and the body and put your mind in someone else's body, wouldn't like the nerves disconnect too? So wouldn't you just be like a armor shell?
Wouldn't you be a what?
Like, wouldn't your mind just be in like an armor, basically? Like you're moving the body, but like I feel like you have nerves and like it would just like.
Oh, well, that's interesting.
You're just saying pain is a mental construct at that point. So if we are.
These are my drawings from last class. They're still there. Let's see how long they
So if
stay.
we are like taking away the mind and putting it in different bodies, can you also say the nerves disconnect too?
Sure, but then it just takes a while to retrain yourself. When you have prosthetics, when you have a prosthetic arm, your brain is sending signals. And the prosthetics are, I will talk more about this with artificial intelligence because it's more specifically related to that. But it now becomes part of you. But it takes a while to get used to that.
Isn't that just like
By analogy,
being able to move it, not like if someone hits it, you should feel that?
Oh no, it becomes part of you in a way that even if you were to look at a fake hand, if it's right next to yours, it's fascinating how they do these studies. There's a phenomenon called not bodily neglect or something like that. I can't remember the name of it. It's where you take on ownership of something as if it's your body. And so what they'll do is they'll cover your arm up, but they'll have a fake arm next to yours, and they'll touch the fake arm. And as they're touching that fake arm, they're actually also simultaneously touching your arm. So you're feeling it, but you're not seeing your hand. You're seeing this other hand get touched. And then they'll get a hammer, and they'll slam it on the fake arm, and you'll freak out as if it's happened to you. So this is a confusion of ownership, to use this analogy. And I've forgotten the phenomenon it's called, but it would happen to a lot of people, right? Because you now take on that as part of you. It's kind of cruel. I don't know the ethics of that, but you're not actually hurting anyone.
I'm probably willing to.
But are you not, isn't that causing anxiety? Isn't that fear and that anxiety in your mind? This is an attempt at a transition here. Anyone catch the reference to the Pixies? Any Pixies fans? All right. That's where that's from. Where is my mind? It's a good question. You actually have a question. Sorry.
I just, like, when he was saying, like, if I see someone get kicked in the balls, I mean...
I believe he said nuts. Don't want to misquote.
I don't, like, scream and go, oh, ow, because, like, that's not in my brain. And I don't
Right.
think guys, like, let's say period cramps or something, they're not like, oh, you know? So it's like...
Well,
The nuts
the-
is just one to, just in,
I know, but, like, if I'm
Ideal.
saying, like, if
Ideal.
my consciousness gets put in a guy's body, and then this doctor's
Interesting
like,
point.
I will torture you by kicking you in the nuts.
it's going to be less
Like, I'm not gonna be
Yeah.
like, oh, that's I have no idea what that feels
Yeah, I don't know what that feels like. So.
I have no fear there.
So, Edmund Husserl is a philosopher from the 1800s. He starts what's known as phenomenology, and he talks about this kind of empathetic recognition of others. And the more similar we are to the other person, the greater an ease and capacity we have to empathize with them, which has a lot of interesting implications with respect to gender and race relations, for example. But that doesn't mean we cannot do it. It takes a bit of work on our part to actually come to recognize and see from their perspective. So it's not the same thing, and that's an interesting point, but it doesn't mean it's impossible. When I see different species yawn, like a dog yawn, it's caused me to yawn. And I don't know what it's like to be a dog, except I can tell when there's a yawn happening, and my mirror neurons are activating when I see the dog yawn. And it causes me to, does that ever happen? You know what I'm talking about. It's not totally weird that I've done that. So I think you're right. The difference in entities in question plays a role in differentiating and making it more difficult to be empathic, if you want. But it's not impossible. Yeah.
you could just replace getting kicked in the nuts with breaking an arm though.
That's true.
I just chose kicked in the nuts because you only see YouTube videos of it. But
That's all you find. That's right. Hey, there's a kitty. No, let's go to the
you guys ever really
other one.
skateboarding and hit a pole on
I know.
it?
I don't know what. See, people are leaving. People can't handle the. Let's stop talking about. He's not even going to come back. He's left the class because he can't handle that talk. So no, that's true, and I think that's what they'll show. And they discovered these mirror neurons in monkeys accidentally. They recognized while one monkey was under an fMRI machine, watching another monkey engaged in goal-directed behavior. The neurons that fire in the motor cortex of the monkey doing something are also firing in the monkey watching it. And the same thing happens when we're under these machines watching somebody undergo pain. As if, again, that's why they're sometimes called, that's why sometimes they're called Dalai Lama neurons or empathy neurons. All right, let's get to it then. The common sense notion. We've been talking about common sense presuppositions with free will. My common sense presupposition is I'm free, and maybe even I'm totally free for what I do, fully responsible. We saw that coming into the metaphysical question of freedom of the will. Personal identity, the presupposition, the common sense notion is I'm the same person through time. Of course I am. I look back to pictures and I say that's me. Is it really you or is it someone similar? No, it's really me. It's identical to me. Numerically identical? Yeah. What does that mean? Oh, the exact same with no change? Numerically identical, you mean? Not qualitatively identical? Once we get deeper into the metaphysical questions, we realize our initial assumptions might be flawed. I want you to keep that in mind, wherever that is, with respect to the mind and body question. The presupposition here is Cartesian substance dualism. This is the default, if you want, of most people today. Not necessarily in philosophy of mind, but of most people in general. Let's just say of the United States, most people are, even though they might not call themselves this, Cartesian substance dualists. There are two substances. That's what the dualist says. And this is common sense. So here's dualism. And it's what's known as a two-way interactionist theory. You have a mind, and it causes things to happen in our body, and bodies cause things to happen to our minds. Pretty simple. But because of this common sense notion that's accepted widely, there are also, not because of that, but even though it's accepted widely, there are a number of issues. And the biggest problem to put it in a nutshell, what's the mind-body problem? It's just this. How do the two interact? To put it in the simplest terms. Did anyone go to the Philosophy Club and Neuro Club meeting last week with the guest speaker, Joe White, on whether or not neuroscience can explain consciousness? Did anyone go to that? Remember I sent an email about that, and I told you how it relates specifically to what we're going to talk about in class, and how you benefit from it? How great it would be if you went. So, I did go. Wouldn't that be ironic? I didn't go either. I was hoping somebody. Anyway, he talks about these things to some extent, and his conclusion is basically that no, neuroscience cannot explain consciousness, and I'll say more about why he thinks that, and why many others think that as well. Which doesn't necessarily lead to this. I don't think Joe White, he's a former professor here in philosophy. I don't think he's necessarily a dualist. I actually don't know, but his claim that neuroscience cannot explain consciousness does not entail dualism necessarily. But while this is common sense, there are a number of problems with it. And the biggest problem, the one that we talk about in the philosophy of mind, where's that clicker? Is that, there it is the question of how something that is not physical can cause something in the physical world. Let's see if this works. Yeah. In response to that, we saw this with Berkeley. What?
You take the clear and you pull
I
it
do?
out every class.
Oh, it's this. We'll see. Maybe it'll work this time. So idealism avoids the problem. How does idealism avoid the problem? If this is graphing out, so to speak, visually what mind-body interactionism is, what would I put for idealism?
Mind only.
That's right. Boom. No problem. No matter. So never mind. You see? What exists for idealists? Minds and ideas. That's it. What is physical stuff? What is matter? Nothing independent of perceivers. Stuff in the world, perceptions, these are ideas in the minds of perceivers. Now, this is not a very common view today. Rauhat discusses this briefly in the reading. And in the text, he gives you an overview of a number of these theories. I'm adding a few more. He doesn't talk about this one, epiphenomenalism. I talk about it because that's such a cool word. Look at that. Doesn't it look neat? Epiphenomenalism. So the epiphenomenalist would chart the mind-body interaction problem this way. How does the mind interact with the body? Let me just do it this way. How do they two go together? Well, the epiphenomenalist is going to argue that the brain or body causes mental states, but it's a one-way interaction. The mind is like the steam coming off of a train. This is an example from the 1880s by a guy named Thomas Huxley, who coins this term, epiphenomenalism. This is a train. I don't know why I'm even trying to draw that. That's train and that's steam. Actually, that's not bad. That looks like a train, doesn't it? Sure. You mean, yeah, it does. That's a train. The steam that comes off the train has no causal powers, no causal efficacy. It doesn't do anything to the train. It's caused by the train, but it doesn't in turn cause things to happen to the train. It is what Huxley calls an epiphenomenon. And the mind is like the steam of a train, of a steam engine. My shadow is an epiphenomena of me. It doesn't cause anything to happen to me. I cause it to be, you see. There aren't many epiphenomenalists today. For the obvious reason, I guess the obvious reason, that it's just obvious to me that my thoughts do cause things to happen. For instance, I hear about this notion of epiphenomenalism that causes me to think about certain things. It causes me to say, epiphenomenalism doesn't make any sense. Why would I invoke things existing that have no causal powers? That violates most of our understanding of science. Why say this exists, but it can't do anything? Everything that exists has potential causal powers. But an epiphenomena, at least under this interpretation, seems to have no causal powers whatsoever. As Daniel Dennett, contemporary philosopher of mind, put it once, invoking epiphenomenalism would be like saying, my car runs on little gremlins. You can't see them, right? You can't perceive them. And really, they don't have any causal powers, but they're in the engine. What are they doing there? They're caused by the car driving. Well, that seems like a weird notion. So epiphenomenalism, which I'm kind of giving a caricature here, I apologize, is not a widely held view. Not like dualism or materialism. How would a materialist or physicalist chart it out, this problem? Dualism is a two-way interactionism. Mind does things that cause things to happen in the body. Body, in turn, does things that cause things to happen in the mind. Idealism gets rid of the problem, dissolves it by saying there aren't bodies, really. They're just minds and ideas. Epiphenomenalism says it's a one-way causal interactionism, but it invokes minds still as a kind of confused, unclear entity. What does a materialist or physicalist do? What's that?
There's only physical entities.
That's right, they're just bodies. And we're done. What is a mind? Well, it depends on your materialistic interpretation. Do you think in terms of behaviorism, as Gilbert Ryle does, who we'll see next class? The majority of the 20th century, at least with respect to science, ignored issues of consciousness and mind to the extent that, I don't want to say ignored it, but if you look at the philosophy and psychology of William James, where consciousness played a central role, after William James, around 1910, you see the rise of behaviorism. And in philosophy, it was later called logical behaviorism. And this is the view that says mental states, thoughts, consciousness, soul, spirit, and so forth, these terms are confusing. They don't really point to anything. We can't see them in any way, can't study them. All we can do is look at the observable behaviors of entities in question to establish their mind or their mental states. Is this person happy? Well, what does it mean to be happy? I can't get into your mind and see the state of happiness, but I can observe your physical behaviors. Are you smiling? What other dispositional states are you in? If you put this person in this situation, would they act in this way? Would they behave this way? You can measure behavior. You can't measure minds. You can't measure thought. And in fact, it goes even further. We get rid of mind to some extent, at least in this in the study of brains and neurons and so forth. And you'll see this to an extreme. Oh, you're right, there it goes again. You'll see it to an extreme. What? You're right, I'm sorry. Why am I wash my hands of it. You were right to laugh at me earlier. Turn it off. I just love the laser on it.
Can't you still use
No,
the laser?
you can't. I tried. The eliminative behaviorism is the opposite direction of idealism. This is the extreme view in science throughout and philosophy throughout the 20th century that says, let's stop talking of mental stuff. Stop talking of minds, souls especially, spirits, even consciousness to an extent. In the same way that we get rid of words like phlogiston. Do you remember that word? Did I talk to you about that before? I don't know if that came up. Have you ever heard the word phlogiston? You know why? Because it doesn't exist. There's nothing that it points to. Scientists used to think it was necessary for fire. Now we don't, and we've eliminated it from our language. Scientists don't speak of phlogiston. They don't speak of ether. I don't think. No, they don't. Because it doesn't have any role to play with respect to what is scientifically interesting. We don't talk of elan vital, this life force. We talk about Krebs cycles. We talk about metabolism. We talk about all sorts of other things that have to do with life that we can study and measure. These other terms that we used to think about and we found out don't exist, we've gotten rid of. We've gotten rid of the words. We talked about that a little bit with philosophy of language. Eliminative materialists are saying all that exists are materials, is material stuff, and we need to get rid of the words that confuse things, like soul, mind, consciousness, and so on. And that's what you find in for the majority of the 20th century until around the 1990s. A little bit earlier in philosophy. Philosophy is a little bit ahead of science on this one, where they see consciousness studies to be very interesting. But in the 1990s, we start to see the development of a greater interest in what consciousness is. And I'll get to that in a moment. Okay, so behaviorism is to say that everything is material. We can't get to the mind of perceivers, of individuals. We can only measure external physical behaviors. Identity theory, very common in neuroscience. In the 1960s, we had evidence that if you did damage to certain parts of the brain, or if you manipulated certain parts of the brain, you can cause a person to do or feel or experience something. There was something developed in the 1990s called the God helmet. For some reason, it was originally a football helmet, but they attached certain kinds of electrodes to it, and if they would, and when you wear it and it stimulates a part of your brain, it invokes what would otherwise be explained as a religious experience, a mystical experience. In other cases where neurosurgery is performed, as many of you may know this, you can perform neurosurgery while the patient is fully awake. Did you know that? Have you seen Hannibal Lecter? I told you there's going to be some awful experiences and descriptions coming up. Do you remember the movie Hannibal Lecter, where maybe it's the second one, where Ray Liotta's character is captured by Hannibal, and Hannibal starts cutting into the guy's brain. He's drugged him, and he's cutting into his brain while he's awake, and then he, for some reason, feeds it to him. And he cooks it. So I'm sorry, this is awful. But the point is that you can be awake while the doctors are cutting into your brain, and there's a reason for this. If you're having, let's say, a tumor removed from the part of your brain that deals with language centers, let's say, so something called Broca's area that deals with the vocalization of words, and there's a tumor being removed from that area, the doctors, this is a bit of a caricature, but it gets to the point, they will have you talk, they'll have you work out certain problems or whatever, while the surgery is going on. It's kind of cruel. You're undergoing surgery and also doing math problems. Total torture. And if you start to slur your words or something, then they'll stop cutting away in that area. And so you're awake while this is happening. Not just for that reason, there's other reasons. And in one instance, they discovered that there's a causal connection between applying a certain amount of electrical stimulation to the brain, a particular part of the brain, I forget which part, and causing the patient to smile. And then they noticed that there was a connection. They kept doing it. They're not like they're playing around. It's like, wow, check that out. Let's continue. But they added a little bit more, and she started laughing. And they asked her, what are you laughing at? And she obviously had no idea why she was laughing, because there's nothing happening amusing, although in order to maintain a sense of control or something like that, she apparently said, oh, you doctors are just so funny, which is not true. They were cutting into her brain at that time, not making jokes. They didn't think it was funny. But that seemed to advocate for, in almost an obvious way, that a mental state, giddiness, laughter, pain, is identical to a brain state. I stub my toe, certain fibers of my brain start to light up. And we can correlate that. We can test that. Certain C fibers are firing. That just is pain. Pain is a mental state, which is an interesting question. Pain is a fascinating topic in philosophy of mind. You might wonder, why is that philosophy of mind? Pain's not just in your head, or is it? When I was younger, I never understood how pain medication worked. It was fascinating to me. I would stub my toe or hurt myself. Say, my leg hurts really bad. Oh, here's some Advil. All right, I take the pill. How does the pill know where to go? How does it know that that's where the pain is? It's a legitimate question. Where does the pill go? Does it know, oh, there's damage to the foot, and it just goes there? Does the medicine go to the toe that's damaged? You think it does, don't you? Just like I did. Yes, where does it go?
Isn't it something that you ingest and then it somehow finds the stuff in it finds its way to calm your brain?
It goes exactly. It goes to the receptors. It dampens the signal to your brain. It doesn't find the injury, which is what I anticipated. I just assumed to take pain medication, the medication will find the injury. It will find the damage. But no, that's not what happens. It dampens the signals. So you're not actually killing the pain, and you're certainly not fixing anything. You're just dampening the signals from the damage to your brain.
That's not entirely true. Advil actually does take down swelling. It pulls down swelling and such. It doesn't go directly to it, but it actually...
It goes everywhere.
Yeah.
Okay, right.
It goes through the blood system, but it does actually help.
Right, but my presumption was the medication is so advanced that it finds and ignores, it doesn't go everywhere, that's a waste of time. It goes right to the damage. That's what I thought a year ago. All right, so... question? No? Okay. So there's identity theory. That sounds right. But then we look at it more deeply and we say, wait a minute, you're going to tell me that the conscious feeling of pain, the conscious feeling of wonder or awe, if you've been to the Grand Canyon, or forget the Grand Canyon, walk outside, look at the clouds hovering over the mountains as it goes out into the ocean. That's freaking amazing. How does that feel? You're going to tell me, oh, that feeling I have when I look out into amazing Santa Barbara is just my neurons firing in my frontal cortex at a certain 44 oscillation hertz or something like that. And that's the explanation. Would you ever be satisfied that you've explained your experience by reducing it to neurons firing? Because that's what neuroscience studies. How do these dendrites connect with these synapses, which connect to these other neurons, which then creates a kind of signal that somehow, and maybe, let's imagine we find your pain, your experience of love, your experience of hate, whatever, is correlated with these neurons firing in this way. Let's imagine we get that story right. So what, you might ask? That doesn't explain how neurons firing in a particular way creates the experience and feeling of whatever it is that I'm experiencing. No matter how developed our neuroscience gets, the critique is, I don't get any explanation by identifying a mental state with a neural state if all I've done is reduce it to neurons firing. That would be analogous to, as one neuroscientist, a guy named Michael Gazzaniga puts it in his book, Who's in Charge, and maybe I referenced this with respect to free will. Imagine trying to explain traffic patterns, why people get blocked up in traffic patterns in the way that they do. Why are traffic jams happening? You know what I mean? You're driving along and then all of a sudden everything stops, inexplicably. And then it just starts going again. And you look around, where was the traffic? Where was the accident? And there's no explanation. It's just people doing stupid things, trying to figure out why are people doing it the way they do? Why are they driving in this way? Right? And we can alleviate this, by the way, with automated cars. Because automated cars can communicate with each other and all drive the same speed. Humans have problems with that. Humans have road rage and other issues. Which these automated cars are eventually going to get, by the way. It's going to happen. If they're going to be truly intelligent, they need to have road rage, the sign of intelligence. And imagine trying to explain traffic patterns by reducing it to a study of the chemical properties of each of the cars. Right? Would you have explained anything by saying, oh, here's what these cars are made out of, and here are the chemical properties of these cars. Now we have an explanation of why the traffic patterns happen the way that they do. By analogy, trying to explain our experiences by reducing them to, or identifying them with neurons firing, seems the wrong level of explanation.
I was just going to say, you're gonna hate on automated trucks, I feel like.
I'm going to hate them? What?
Because you hate trucks now. So
Oh, no, I don't hate trucks. That's the drivers of the trucks I have a problem with.
Right, but when they're going to be automated,
well, then
a reason to.
I don't know if my... Well, then we'll really determine whether it's irrational to think all pickup truck drivers are jackasses. Even robot ones? Presumably they won't drive like jackasses. Okay. I'm conceiving of this world. Automated pickup truck drives differently than a Geo Metro or something. Okay, functionalism we'll talk about next week with artificial intelligence. I'll just give you the slogan. What is a mind for a functionalist? A mind, mental states, thoughts, desires, beliefs, and so on, are simply functional states of a brain. In the same way that a heart can be replaced by an appropriate functioning plastic and silicon and so forth, a brain is really just the same type of thing. It's an organ. We just need to figure out what its function is. And then we can replicate it. And we can build a mind, so to speak. So that we'll talk about next week. Limited materialism we already talked about. And the last one is an interesting view. A guy named David Chalmers advocates something like it. It's called panpsychism. Does anyone know what pan means? What panpsychism means?
Pan means all, right?
That's right. Suke. Anyone take psychology? Yeah, what's psychology the study of?
The mind.
The mind and the soul.
The soul is what suke in Greek literally means. The study of the soul. Although I suspect your teachers here don't translate it that way. You should ask them though. You should ask him. So everything is imbued with consciousness. In order to solve the problem not only of interactionism, but of how mental states, think again of thoughts, feelings, what it is like to be you sitting in your chairs right now, how does that come out of mere brain stuff? That seems totally mysterious. Panpsychism says, well, it's not mysterious if we start with the assumption everything is imbued with consciousness, just in varying degrees. It isn't magical that consciousness emerges from physical stuff. It's that in the same way that physicists presuppose matter as a basic constituent of reality, we perhaps ought to consider consciousness as a basic constituent of reality as well. And so everything is imbued with consciousness. Tables, this marker. It's kind of odd. While it may solve the problem of how consciousness emerges, it still doesn't tell us what it is or why we have it. It seems totally mysterious. You don't need to get this down. This is a quote again from Thomas Huxley. How is it that anything so remarkable as a state of consciousness comes about as a result of irritating nervous tissue, while that is just about as unaccountable as the appearance of the jinn or the demons or the genies when Aladdin rubbed his lamp or any other ultimate fact of nature? It seems unaccountable. It seems mysterious. It seems magical. And as some philosophers put it, Colin McGinn is one of them, contemporary, who thinks that the understanding of consciousness, human consciousness, is totally beyond our capacity. Human beings simply cannot ever know what consciousness is, how it emerges, and why we even have it. That may be an easier question than the first two. He calls us, he says that we're cognitively closed. We are like little insects, little ants, trying to understand Einstein's general theory of relativity, or Stephen Hawking's understanding of black holes. Rest in peace. Stephen Hawking just died. An ant is never going to understand Einstein's theory of relativity. They're cognitively closed to it. That's what he means. We are like ants with respect to consciousness. We will never, ever, ever understand it. Theoretically, we lack the capacity. Others, like David Chalmers, are going to say, it's a hard problem. This is the hard problem of consciousness, in contrast to the easy problem. The easy problem, and this will give you a sense of how hard the hard problem is, the easy problem is saying how this 3-pound lump of flesh gives rise to sight. How can we see? How do our eyes take in information based upon receiving light, sending that signal back? You notice your eyes are up here, and the back of the brain is where your occipital cortex is. That's really weird. There's like 30 different areas in the back of the brain devoted just to vision. And that's an easy problem, Chalmers says. It's easy in relation to the hard problem, which is, how in the hell does that give us consciousness? Or if that's kind of nasty, just look at that. It looks just the same. Sharp hay. As far as you know, that's a dog. But I guarantee you nature didn't make that. Humans made that. Selfish, horrible humans bred dogs to look like that. It's a Shar Pei. And let me tell you why that wouldn't survive in nature. Because right now you see its eyes, those are as wide open as they get. That's how the dog sees. You can't tell the difference between the dog and the towel. This is just human selfishness. Let's make a dog that's cuddly. That's all that is. And it is cute, I'll give it that. But it's not surviving. And you know that other dog that barely can breathe, the pug? Is that what it is? You know how I know it can't breathe well? Because it's suffering. Have you heard a pug try to breathe? It's always struggling to survive. And we think that's acceptable. No offense if you have a pug. But it's awful. It's just total torture. Its whole life. Can't breathe. This is a terrible terrible lecture. Let's go back to the brain. Or, it's interesting, there's a little Shar-Pei inside that head. Because it's a Shar-Pei. What's the hard problem? How that gives rise to conscious experience. There's an explanatory gap. And this is why it is convincing to many people, in particular people like Descartes, who say that dualism makes the most sense. That I can't look at a brain, and by the way, Descartes looked at a lot of brains. He dissected a lot of corpses. Some of them weren't corpses. Some of them were alive. Not humans, but animals. I'll talk about that later. That's called vivisection. The reason why a lot of people find substance dualism compelling is because of what we just said leading up to this. It seems too remarkable, too extraordinary that mere flesh, physical stuff that folds over upon itself is complex enough, is enough to give rise to the experience of consciousness. Years ago, I went to the Bodies exhibit. It was in San Diego, and this is where they have, I think it's a traveling exhibit, where they show, because they developed a new technology called, I think it's called plasticization or something, where they're able to preserve parts of the body, even very detailed and delicate parts like nervous tissue and veins and so forth. And you can go to this exhibit and you can see the brain. And these are, I assume, people who donated their bodies to science, although there's some debate about that. The Bodies exhibit might have gotten them from Chinese prisons. I don't know if that's accurate. Nevertheless, you should look into that before you go to the exhibit. I only learned about that afterwards. But you can see the brain. I remember going to it. I wasn't grossed out, but it was just weird. Because I looked at and you see the whole body, and you see the inside, you see everything. And I was looking at the brain, and the thought occurred to me, hey, I have one of those. And then the thought occurred to me, hey, that thought that I have one of those came out of that. That thing, which scientists tell us is the most complex bit of matter in the universe. Which, of course, not coincidentally, is coming from the brain telling us that. It's kind of narcissistic for the brain to be thinking that. The brain is thinking, I'm the most complex bit of matter in the universe.
It also named itself.
And it named, yes, there's all of that. It named itself brain. Actually, it intended to call itself Brian, but we misread that. This really is Brian. Why are you calling me brain? All right, that's stupid. Sorry. Dumb brain. Brian. That threw me off. What was I? And anyway, it's incomprehensible that that's enough. Something else is needed. And this is why substance dualism is so compelling. And the arguments I'm going to give, which I hope are better than the arguments you saw from the John Perry article, the dialogue, because remember Chaplain Miller's arguments were filled with fallacies. And I think Perry was unjustifiably representing that position. Descartes, and I'm going to give you 4 arguments. Descartes has 2 explicitly from his Meditations. Meditations 1 and 2 is review. You've already read those before. Meditation 6 is the newer one. This argument you should be familiar with. I'm just going to focus on not the epistemological question, but the metaphysical question. And all he's showing is that the mind and body are distinct. That's going to be the conclusion. It is not arguing for the immortality of the soul, although Descartes thinks that this stage, this move, this argument is necessary to get to that. He's just showing that the mind is distinct, because if the mind is identical with the brain and the body, then when the brain and body die, guess what? So too does the mind, so too does you. And so, how does he make this case? Again, I'm going to give you 4 arguments. Each argument is the same structure. 3 premises and a conclusion. And if you looked at your study guide, which of course you have, you'll know that there's a question related to this reading for today. So the text, Rauhut calls it the conceivability argument. I prefer indubitability argument, because obviously it's a better word. I can doubt the existence of my body. Premise 1 is I can doubt the existence of my body and all of its parts. And we don't need to rehearse that argument. You remember that from the first test. I can conceive of doubting my body because I can imagine being unsure of all data that comes in from my five senses. All of that is potentially mistaken. And therefore, there's no logical contradiction in saying, maybe I don't even have a body. The only reason I know I have a body, or presume to know I have a body, is from my five senses. But if I've thrown out all of the beliefs that come from our five senses, then doubting the existence of my body is a logical possibility. But notice it's not possible, according to Descartes' argument. He starts, remember, with doubting the senses, but then he imagines an evil demon in this hyperbolic thought experiment. I can't doubt my own mind, even if I bring along this evil genius that's deceived me. Of course, to be deceived implies an existing thing, because to be deceived is to be confused, to be fooled. Something has to be fooled. So we see that there's a difference between 1 and 2. And to connect these premises together to get to the conclusion, we invoke Leibniz's law. Now, Descartes doesn't explicitly use this. This is a reformulation into standard logical form of Descartes' indubitability argument. He doesn't call it an indubitability argument, by the way. That's what we call it after. 3 seems an obvious point. So premise 1, I can doubt my body. Premise 2, I can't doubt my mind. Premise 3, Leibniz's law. If x and y are identical, then they have to have all of the same features or characteristics. That's numerical identity. Straightforward. We probably don't have any reason to doubt that. And we don't want to doubt any of this yet. Whenever you, again, get in the habit of hearing and seeing an argument, assume for the sake of argument that the premises are all true. And if they were true, would they lead to the conclusion? And the conclusion here is going to be the same, basically, in each part. Therefore, my mind's not identical with my body or any of its parts. Why is that? Well, my mind has a feature that my body doesn't. My mind has the feature of being indubitable. Can't doubt it. But my body has a different feature, namely that of being dubitable. It follows that they cannot be identical. I would be violating Leibniz's law if I said they were identical, even though they had different features in question. Therefore, the conclusion, which follows, presumably from necessity, if the premises are all true, my mind is not identical with my body or any of its parts, is obviously the case. I'm not going to evaluate this now. I want us to just get a sense of how the argument works. When we look at Gilbert Ryle next week, we'll come back to this argument. So you want to make sure you understand and get it down. How might Gilbert Ryle respond to this argument? So that's the indubitability or conceivability argument, straight out of Descartes, as is this one, the divisibility argument. And it's the same structure. Premise 1, my body and all of its parts is divisible. Let's assume that's true, which is easy to do, again, because you can imagine cutting up your body into parts. Premise 2, assume it's true that the mind is indivisible. That might be a little more controversial to you, but assume it's true for the moment. Leibniz's law, which again, let's say you have a question like this on the test, and you're writing out multiple arguments that have as a premise Leibniz's law, you can use LL as long as somewhere else in that question you've explained what Leibniz's law is. So you can truncate it the second instance of it. Leibniz's law says if x and y are identical, then they must have all of the same features, characteristics. And it follows that my mind cannot be or is not identical with my body, all of its parts. X and y have something different. They don't have, so one has the property of being divisible, the other has the property of being indivisible. Whenever I look into myself, I'm unable to distinguish any parts, as Descartes says. And by that he means, as a mental conscious being, I'm unified. I suspect, were he confronted with multiple personality dissociation issues or examples, he might say, even in those cases, there is a unified individual consciousness. It's just that unified consciousness is dominant at one time. It's not actually one mind, he might have to say. There are multiple minds to maintain this notion of unification. When that one consciousness in Sybil, for example, remember who has multiple personalities, when that one is conscious, the others are not. Okay. So, for the sake of argument, accept that that's true, and the conclusion would then follow. We'll return to that argument as well. Maybe we're not convinced about premise 2. Maybe we want to say that we can have a divided mind. But I want to hold off on that for the moment. The third argument, this is a thought experiment, and it's not explicitly in Descartes, but it supports the Cartesian conclusion that mind is distinct from body. And it's a thought experiment from Wilhelm Gottfried Leibniz, or it's called Leibniz-Mill, where he's to imagine expanding the human body and brain to the size of a factory such that we can walk through it and investigate its internal workings. Like the movie Inner Space. Anyone seen Inner Space? Martin Short from the 1980s? Is that a little before your time? Nobody saw Inner Space? Okay, forget that. What about Curious George? It was on a couple days ago. Remember that? You saw it? The episode? George shrinks himself down to the size of a germ because the man with the yellow hat had a cold. You remember that episode?
I read a lot of the books.
I don't know if this was a book. This was on television a couple days ago.
Yes.
Surely you still watch Curious George, right? Well, you should. So Curious George, he shrinks down, he goes into the body of the man with the yellow hat, whose name is Ted, by the way. Do you know that? You gotta pay attention. Catch that. His name is Ted, he gets a cold, and George shrinks down and goes through the body and finds the germs. They're playing music inside the body, I don't know why. But he goes through the brain and all that, and nowhere does he see mental processes. Or the movie Magic Bus, don't they do something similar? They go into the body. Use that example if you don't like Curious George. Or use the neurosurgery example. You can have the patient awake and tell them, imagine this or that. And we can know that there's a correlation in their brain where this kind of imagining happens. And as they're cutting into the brain, they see neuronal firings, they see blood and whatever else, but they don't see the mental states. In other words, upon examining the body and its inner workings, when you've expanded it, so to speak, you see all sorts of physical processes. But you don't see, premise 2, you don't see any mental processes. Leibniz's law, again, follows that mental processes cannot be identical with physical processes, which is simply another way of saying mind and body are not identical. That may sound like a trivial kind of thought experiment, but it's really getting at a similar problem as that raised by contemporary philosophers who see issues with pure reductionism. What is consciousness? It's neurons firing. Well, that seems to be limitation. There's something missing in that story. And in fact, that takes us to the final argument that we're going to cover. We can look at other arguments maybe next time. There are more than just these 4 about mind as distinct from body. You've got near-death experiences, for example, that could be used as evidence or arguments on behalf of the Cartesian substance dualist view. Out-of-body experiences. You heard of those? Probably. And they're rare, but they happen enough to be interesting. They happen, and there's the consistency of many of the stories are of interest. However, you might imagine it's hard to prove that. How can I prove that I had an out-of-body experience? Well, explain what happened. And it's oftentimes in surgeries, right? Where you're under anesthesia, which is interesting. I forgot to tell you, to go back to the Science of Consciousness study. One of the persons who started that conference on Toward a Science of Consciousness, where they bring together anesthesiologists, and this is the main guy, Stuart Hameroff is an anesthesiologist, neuroscientists, people in the field of artificial intelligence, philosophy, cognitive science, psychology, literature, religion, theology, and so forth, all coming together trying to figure out what the hell consciousness is. And it's fascinating to me that the one who started it is a trained anesthesiologist. And what is the job of an anesthesiologist? To turn off consciousness. And what does this leading anesthesiologist tell us about consciousness? That we don't know what it is. And what's their job? To turn that thing that we don't know what it is off. And then back on. It's got to come back on. Because if you give too much anesthesia, you've shut off consciousness completely. If you give too little, now this doesn't happen all the time. It happens rarely. But if you get too little anesthesia, you can be paralyzed because and not be able to communicate, but conscious enough to know what's going on and feel what's going on when you're undergoing surgery. Now that doesn't happen very often, I don't think. I mean, I don't know. I don't think it happens much, but it's a possibility. Yeah, today's filled with terrible stories. You're fine. If you're going into surgery soon, don't worry, you'll be fine. They're really good at doing it. Although they don't know what consciousness is. Anyone tells you that they know what consciousness is, or that scientists say consciousness is this, that's a mistake. There is no consensus in science, in philosophy, even in theology, really, of what consciousness is. And I think that's one of the most fascinating things. And that's one of the reasons why the previous administration, the Obama administration, well, I don't know if it's one of the reasons, but instead of funding NASA, which is looking out into the astronomical, they were funding what's known as the Brain Project, I think it's called, devoting a lot of attention and resources to understanding the human brain. That's the new frontier, so to speak, of human understanding of our place in the world. I don't know what the current administration is doing with respect to the Brain Project. Something tells me that that's not being funded, but I don't know. You'd have to look into that. But, so Hammeroff is talking about this idea that when we're under anesthesia, we're turning off consciousness, but we're not entirely sure what that is. And in some cases, when we're under anesthesia, in rare cases, patients report experiencing themselves as if they're on the table, but as their body's on the table, but they're hovering above it, listening to the physicians, listening to the surgeons. And they can recall what the surgeons were saying. And the surgeons say, yeah, we were saying that. That's not evidence for out-of-body experiences being legitimate. That may only be that consciousness was not completely shut off and that they were actually hearing things that were happening. In order to prove that, in order to give evidence for out-of-body experiences, we'd have to come up with some way of testing that, which is not obvious, but there is a way that they've come up with. Do you know what I'm talking about?
Couldn't you have them like how many fingers am I holding? If they're unconscious, their eyes are closed. Yet they can still tell you how many fingers or some example.
Something like that.
They'd be able to tell.
That's what they've done. I don't know. I've not, and this was years ago they started doing it, where again science is taking consciousness and paranormal situations or strange situations seriously. Near-death experiences, out-of-body experiences. And so what they'll do is, since it's so consistent, the story of people who have had out-of-body experiences in surgery situations is that they see themselves from a corner of the room. It's always above. They're hovering above. So presumably then they'd have a bird's eye view of the whole room. And one way of testing this is to put shelves around the top of the rooms, of surgery rooms, that don't get in the way of any of the actual procedures. And you can't see what's on the shelves unless you're way up there, you see. And so they'll put weird things up there, like a stuffed animal of a narwhal that's purple. That if you saw it, you'd say, that's weird, and you'd remember it. And so here's how they would do it. If they come out of the surgery and claim to have had an out-of-body experience, they would just ask them, what did you see? Oh, well, I saw the doctors doing this or that. I heard them say this or that. I was watching my body as it was happening. And as I was floating up to the ceiling, I looked and I saw there was a stuffed narwhal. That would be evidence of something weird going on that needs explanation. That might point toward a Cartesian substance dualism. To my knowledge, no evidence of that sort has been established yet. But something like you were talking about, it seems that that's doable. Maybe they have discovered it. To my mind, that's not the case yet. In any case, those are other arguments. Rauhat discusses them. Here's the last one I want to talk about, and it comes from an Australian philosopher named Frank Jackson, who's famous in the philosophy of mind because of this little thought experiment called the knowledge argument. Hundreds and hundreds of papers in philosophy have been written about this thought experiment. Maybe not hundreds and hundreds, but probably over 100. It's called the knowledge argument, or what did Mary know? And let me give you a little background in the thought experiment. And the point here, kind of like the Leibniz-Mill thought experiment, Leibniz's thought experiment about personal identity pushing the psychological continuity view, the King of China example. It's supposed to be priming our intuitions. It's an intuition pump. So in this story, you have Mary, who is a trained neuroscientist. And she, in this hypothesis, in this story, knows everything there is to know about color perception. Mary is omniscient, is one way of putting it. She's omniscient with respect to the physical facts of color perception. She understands everything there is to know about light and frequency and wavelengths and how they affect objects and bounce off of objects and affect our cornea, retina, rods and cones, and sends it through the optic nerve and all of that. She knows that whole story. All of the physical facts. Every relevant physical fact connected to color perception, Mary knows it. However, she's learned all of this while locked in a black and white room. Her eyes are such that, or she's wearing glasses or something, contacts maybe, that prohibit her from seeing or experiencing any color. Her skin color, she can't see that. Books are black and white, videos are black and white. All the things that she uses, all the resources she has to learn about color perception, in no instance does she experience color. So that's the setup. Our intuitions are, according to Jackson, initially, he's, by the way, changed his mind on this. He's famous for this thought experiment, and then years later he says, you know what, I disagree with myself earlier. We'll talk about why that is later. While she's locked in the room and never having yet experienced color, but having all the physical facts of color perception, we put all that together and we imagine that when she leaves the room for the first time and sees a ripe red tomato or a red shirt or whatever, she's going to gain something new. She's going to learn something new. And if that's what our intuitions tell us, then when she learns something new, namely what it's like to experience red, because she's never experienced red before, she's never experienced color before, when she experiences it for the first time, our intuitions are she learns something new. And if she learns something new, that means the physical facts are not all that there is. Because why? Presumably she had all the physical facts to begin with. And so physicalism must be false. Put in logical standard form, premise 1, while locked in a room, Mary knows all the physical facts of color perception. But while locked in that same room, Mary lacks facts about qualitative or experiential or phenomenal facts, if you want. The experience. That goes back to, philosophers use the term qualia, which is the qualitative experience. It's the what it is like to be you. There's a way it is like from your first person perspective to be sitting in the chair, to be uncomfortable, to be tired, to be hungry, to be ready to get out of class. Sad that there's still an interminable 5 more minutes. There's a feeling that goes along with that I've just expressed. There's something it is like to be you experiencing that conscious feel. I can have all the physical facts, but until I've experienced something, and then we throw in Leibniz law, until I've experienced something, I lack an understanding or a knowledge of what it is like to have that experience. That sounds almost common sense, trivially true. But it isn't trivially true to materialists or physicalists that there's more to the world than physical facts. Yes?
How do you disagree with himself?
Don't worry about that yet. Good question, though. He accepted one of the critiques of contemporary philosophers. David Lewis is one of them. The other ones I've forgotten. And ended up agreeing. So yeah, you know what? I was wrong. It takes a lot of nuts, if you will, to use your previous term, to publicly disagree with yourself and realize I made a mistake. I was wrong. So good on him for that. You can use other examples. I might know all of the facts about sound waves, and music. I know music theory, let's say. I know all the facts about music, how music is made, how the strings vibrate, the mathematics of and ratios with respect to frequency, and how that gives rise to certain sounds, and how it gives rise to certain melodies, and I know all of the physical facts. But until I've experienced the music of Beethoven, or Brahms, or Bieber, the B musician I can come up with. There's surely another B musician. Huh? The Beatles. How did I go to Bieber before the Beatles? What the hell? I apologize. So anyway, until I've experienced the music, don't you think you lack something? You have all the physical facts about music and sound and so forth, but until you hear the music, there's something you lack. The purely physical fact seems to be a limitation.
So, like both ways, like if she was in a colorless room, she can know everything about color, but she's not necessarily going to know and come out and see something red and know it's red. Because she can't, like, as humans, we can't see every light going off. She's not going to know it's red. And if you're like with notes, you can know every single note and all the chords, but when you hear it for the first time, you're not going to know actually what note it is.
Okay, so you're going to know what it's like to hear music generally. Would you even know it's music? Is that what you're saying?
Like, no,
Ah.
like I'm saying, like, kind of like that.
Yeah, interesting.
Like, yeah, she can know about colors and she can see that it's red, but she doesn't know it's red.
I guess we can then say, and what you're looking at now is a red shirt. And she'll be like, oh,
Yeah.
now I know what it's like to see red. That's red. Instead of frequency 4572.9 or whatever.
But if she knew the exact frequency, then that wouldn't be an issue because she would be able to understand the frequency is not how we understand it and actually see the color.
You can tell the
We
frequency.
can't, no, we can't tell.
You could if you had knowledge of
No,
every
right.
single thing, every physical knowledge of it, you could tell in frequencies
No,
what
because you
something
have to
is.
say this frequency equals this color, but she's not able to see that.
But she knows the whole process.
She knows the process. But
She
note,
knows the process, so she could see it in frequencies where we see it in
good,
color.
this is good, yeah. Good.
Can you
How-
see the process?
I'm sorry?
No, I can't see the
No, no,
process.
but she could see, she would, yes, because you've had the experience of seeing it in a color, but
But-
she would see it in purely frequencies.
But is she experiencing it though? She has an experience, and that is seeing the frequencies. I can have an experience of reading sheet music. I can have experience of reading the frequency numbers. This sound is at this oscillation. But that's very different, according to the thought experiment, than experiencing the vibrations on my ear, getting into my
But
head.
if she knows the entire process through, wouldn't she then actually know those processes and be
Ah.
able to recognize them when we wouldn't be able to because we've been
That's it.
experiencing the entire process? If you know the process, you would be inept
So-
enough, assuming you know every single process goes down.
It would be
you
like,
would be inept enough to know what vibrations hitting your ear.
you'd be inept enough?
Or not
Adept enough. Adept.
sorry, yeah.
So it would be like those color by numbers, where there's a number that represents a color. And you've never seen colors before, but you know the frequency. And so you'd look at a painting, and instead of actual red there, it would be the frequency for red. And you'd look at it and say, oh, that's such a great use of that frequency.
Yeah.
Really?
If you knew the whole process, you would be able to see it in frequencies. Where you or I thinking about that would be nuts.
But, like,
But if you're that
Again with the nuts? Okay. All right. Yeah, okay, that's fascinating. That's one potential refutation. And I'm not sure you're convinced by it. And then real quick, last hand, and we'll have to finish here.
I was gonna say it's kind of like a mixture of both of those, where it's like there's movies of people who have like never been to Earth and they know what water is, they know what it is. It's like okay, it's like H2O, it has this composition. Like
Ooh, that's a
she
big
would know
one,
the
yeah.
frequency, she would know that. She'd be like, whoa, what the heck is this? And you'd be like, oh, well, look at this like on a wave chart. She's like, wait, that's this.
That's what we
that.
call
And
blah,
then
blah,
she's like,
blah.
and it's like a different connection. There's a
I
third
see.
party. It's not this frequency. Oh, that's this. She would have to have that connection of, oh, what is red? It's like say on a computer, you click it and it has like red, green, blue on a computer, and then you click on like if you were to have a way to like measure this red, it's like, oh, those numbers match this, so that is red.
And that's the point.
That's the connection between it. She knows all this, so she has a way to measure what the experience is and confirm what
Right,
it is, the
but-
definition of it.
But the point is, how do I translate, like computer jargon, computer programming? How can I look at that, the bits of ones and zeros that represent something, and then give rise to the experience? The thought experience is trying to show you can't. No amount of physical facts gives us the experience. But we're going to have to stop there, and we'll return to that question next time. Here are your quizzes. Make sure you don't take them, but just note the score that you got. See you next time.